Nightfall, the great auditor of the soul, arrives with the quiet power that often unveils a hidden tenet of the mind, the relentless overthinker. As the external world dims and demands recede, an internal world of churning thoughts, recursive worries, and unprocessed fragments of the day swells to fill the void. The phenomenon of nocturnal overthinking, that familiar spiral of analyzing past conversations, rehearsing future scenarios, and dissecting anxieties with a clarity that feels both urgent and paralyzing, is not a simple character flaw or random occurrence. It is a complex interplay of neurobiology, evolutionary psychology, and the unique environmental conditions of the night. We overthink at night because the confluence of biological transition, sensory reduction, depleted cognitive control, and the existential quiet of darkness creates a perfect storm for our brain's threat detection and meaning-making systems to operate unchecked, free from the daylight's grounding distractions. The primary biological driver of this nightly mental shift is the transition in brain state and neurochemistry as we prepare for sleep. As daylight fades, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's master clock, orchestrates a rise in the hormone melatonin, which promotes drowsiness and initiates the cascade toward sleep. However, this transition is not an instantaneous flip of a switch, but a gradual process during which different brain networks power down at different rates. Crucially, the limbic system, our emotional and threat processing center, home to the amygdala, often remains highly active even as the prefrontal cortex (PFC), the brain's executive CEO responsible for rational analysis, decision-making, and impulse control, begins to slow and disengage. This creates a dangerous imbalance. We are left with heightened emotional reactivity and fear perception, but with diminished top-down regulatory capacity to calm or contextualize those feelings. It is akin to having a hypervigilant security alarm blaring in a control room, where the operators are becoming drowsy. An unresolved worry from the day, which the PFC could logically dismiss at 2 p.m., becomes a catastrophic loop at 2 a.m., because the rational counter-argument is offline. Furthermore, the neurotransmitter cortisol, the stress hormone, naturally follows a diurnal rhythm, typically lower at night. However, if anxiety is triggered, a cortisol spike can occur, directly stimulating the amygdala and further inhibiting the PFC, cementing the overthinking loop. This biological shift is powerfully amplified by the environmental and sensory context of night. Daylight is inherently filled with sensory stimuli, visual inputs, sounds, tasks, and social interactions that demand and absorb our attentional resources. This constant engagement provides a form of cognitive scaffolding, structuring our thoughts and keeping them tethered to present moment, external reality. Night, in stark contrast, is characterized by sensory reduction. The lights are low, the world is quieter, and we are often alone with our thoughts in a still, dark room. This deprivation of external input removes the competition for our brain's processing power. With no new data coming in, the brain turns its vast processing capability inward to the data already stored in its cache, the events, social interactions, and unresolved problems of the day. In the absence of a real-time task, the mind defaults to a review mode. This is compounded by the fact that, in the dark, our primary sense vision is neutralized, forcing us into an internal, abstracted space. The worries we overthink are rarely about tangible, immediate physical threats in the room, but are almost exclusively abstract, socio-emotional. and future-oriented precisely the kinds of problems our ancient brain systems are poorly equipped to resolve quickly. The quiet and the dark, meant to be conducive to rest, instead become an echo chamber for our most persistent mental reverberations. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, this nocturnal mental activity may have once served a critical adaptive function. For our ancestors, the night was the most vulnerable time, a period of reduced visibility and heightened danger from predators and rival groups. A state of hypervigilance and detailed mental review before sleep could have been advantageous. Mentally mapping the day's territory for threats, replaying social exchanges to navigate complex tribal politics, or planning the next day's hunt. The brain's negativity bias its tendency to prioritize and remember potential threats would be especially useful in this context, ensuring survival by erring on the side of caution. While we no longer face saber-toothed tigers, our modern predators are social rejection, professional failure, and existential uncertainties. The ancient neural hardware still runs its threat-scanning software, interpreting a critical email or an awkward conversation with the same alarm bell urgency as a physical threat. At night, without the corrective lens of daytime activity, this outdated security system conducts a full diagnostic, flagging every minor social slight and potential future problem as a 5-alarm fire, compelling us to solve them immediately. Furthermore, the depletion of cognitive and emotional resources by the end of the day plays a critical role. The psychological concept of ego depletion, akin to mental muscle fatigue, suggests that our capacity for self-regulation, focused attention, and complex problem-solving is a finite resource that depletes with use throughout the day. By nighttime, after hours of making decisions, exerting self-control, and managing tasks, our cognitive battery is critically low. This depletion directly impairs the very faculties inhibitory control, rational distancing, emotional regulation needed to shut down repetitive thought cycles. What we might manage with perspective during a morning coffee feels utterly insurmountable at midnight, because the mental tools required to manage it are worn out. Additionally, physical and mental fatigue lower our pain threshold for psychological discomfort. We have less resilience, so anxieties feel heavier and more urgent, propelling us into overthinking as a maladaptive attempt to regain a sense of control over the discomfort we are too tired to simply tolerate. Finally, the night imposes a potent existential and symbolic framework that fuels introspection. Darkness has long been associated in human consciousness with the unknown, the unconscious, and mortality. The slowing of the day's momentum creates a silent space where larger, philosophical questions about purpose, meaning, the passage of time, and our own mortality can surface unobstructed by daily busyness. This can elevate overthinking from mundane worries to profound existential dread. Moreover, the act of lying in bed, attempting to surrender to the vulnerability of sleep, itself mirrors a loss of conscious control. For individuals prone to anxiety, this required surrender can be frightening, and the mind responds by fiercely engaging in the illusion of control that overthinking provides. If I can just think of every possible outcome and solution, I will be safe. Ironically, this mental frenzy is the very thing that prevents the restorative loss of consciousness they seek. The bed, intended as a place of rest, becomes a cognitive prison, where the walls are made of what-ifs and the bars are forged from regret. In conclusion, we overthink at night not because we are weak or flawed, but because we are biological and psychological beings navigating a modern world with ancient equipment. The perfect storm of a disengaging prefrontal cortex, a hyper-alert amygdala, a sensory-deprived environment, evolved threat detection systems, depleted cognitive resources, and the existential weight of darkness conspires to unleash our inner analyst at the very time it is least equipped to function effectively. Understanding this multi-pronged cause is the first step toward mitigation. It demystifies the experience, separating us from the content of the thoughts and allowing us to see the process itself as a predictable, if unpleasant, neurobiological event. Strategies to counter it, such as a structured worry period earlier in the evening, mindfulness practices to anchor in the present, or even simple sensory re-engagement like listening to a calming podcast work. By deliberately intervening in this cascade, either by reintroducing cognitive control, providing benign external stimuli to quiet the internal noise, or recalibrating the nervous system before the vulnerable transition into night begins, recognizing that the midnight mind is a biased, fatigued, and evolutionarily tuned narrator allows us to greet its dramatic pronouncements not with panic, but with a weary knowing sigh, and perhaps the wisdom to save the conversation for the clear light of morning. Thank you for watching.